Well, hello and welcome to another episode of The Mark Medley Show. And The Mark Medley Show can be heard on many different channels and in many different avenues. You have many ways that you can catch The Mark Medley Show. You can catch it right here on Spreaker. You can catch it on iHeartRadio. You can catch it on Google Play. You can catch it on Apple iPods. You can catch it on the TuneIn app. So there are many venues of which you can catch the Mark Medley Show, and I'm so glad if you're joining me on whichever one that you chose to join me on. I do ask that you subscribe or follow, whatever the platform asks you to do. Always a pleasure to be with you. Today's episode, though, it really has mixed emotions for me because it's sad on the one hand, but it's good on the other. But the question that I ask in this episode is, why does it take a disaster to bring out the best in us? Regardless of where the disaster is, whether it was in New Jersey with Sandy, whether it was in New Orleans with Katrina, now in Texas with Harvey, or whether it was New York with 9/11, one of the things you always hear the newscasters or the commentators say is, it brings out the best in us. I can remember when 9/11 hit, everybody got together. Matter of fact, there was a big ecumenical prayer service in Yankee Stadium. That was a combination of all different faiths, backgrounds, and religions. It was a beautiful thing. But the question becomes, how come we can't do something like that more often? How come that can occur when a natural disaster is not in place? With 9/11, again, we saw it. We saw New Yorkers come out, because that's the other thing, that regardless of where it's held, whomever the people that are impacted, they're the stronger for it. They're the best. That's what we expect out of New Yorkers. That's what we expect out of New Jerseyans. That's what we expect out of New Orleans or Louisianians. And that's what we expect out of Texans. Regardless of where it's hit, that's the expectation. But the question I have is, why doesn't that same spirit come through on an everyday basis when it's not a natural disaster? Why does it take people's homes being flooded out, people losing their lives, people losing all their possessions and everything they have? Why does it take that? The loss of life, the loss of family members. Why does it take that in order for the best to come out in us? How come the best can't be in us every day in terms of how we treat each other? Why is it that we can't be polite, courteous, helpful, serving each other on a daily basis, compared with only, or for the most part, when something catastrophic occurs? Because that's when we see it. I mean, at that point, it doesn't matter with race, does not matter with gender, does not matter with sexual preference or orientation, does not matter with ethnic or religious background. None of that comes into play when a natural disaster or a disaster strikes. Why wouldn't that same, or why can't that same spirit be in place when a disaster is not here? Why can't that same spirit be in place, that same love, that same compassion, that same caring? Why can't that take place on a daily basis? And that's the question and the topic of this particular podcast today. Why does it take a disaster to bring out the best in us? And while I have us here, my heart goes out to the folks in Texas with Hurricane Harvey. That is the most rain I think anywhere here in the United States has seen. I'm sure that's a record. Matter of fact, what came to my mind was, I can't imagine in biblical times when you get into the story of Noah, where it rained for 40 days and for 40 nights. Can you imagine the water that came within a 1, 2, 3, 4 day period? What it must have been like to be raining heavy for 40 days and 40 nights. So my heart goes out to those who reside in that Houston area. I have family members who live down there as well in the Missouri City area, and prayerfully and thankfully, they haven't been impacted by flood, even though they've been getting the rain. But they haven't been flooded out. Their possessions are still intact. They are still in safe grounds. But if you look on the news on a daily basis as this is going through, you see how many people have lost everything. And I've been sharing with folks, and why, again, the reason for this particular podcast is what takes man years to put together or to create or to build, God can wipe out in seconds. 1 or 2 good rainstorms or some heavy wind can take down within minutes something that took years to build. So my heart goes out to those folks in Houston, Texas. There was a news report that came on today of a police officer who lost his life on Sunday, who was trying to get to the Houston area to help. He was going on his regular police job, but he was going out to now assist in the flood efforts. And turned out he wound up being a victim in the flood himself. And that's Officer Steve Perez. He was on the force for 34 years. He was 2 days before his 61st birthday. He was 60. And 2 days prior to his death, meaning I guess that would have been today or tomorrow, he would have turned 61. And it would have been his birthday. But he was killed in the line of duty, trying to go help others, trying to make life better for others. I mean, these stories that you see on the news of the folks evacuating, they're horrific. And I would expect nothing else from anyone who's in the area but to help each other. They interviewed various people and they said, well, why are you doing this? And many people say, because somebody helped me. Or I remember whenever I was down and somebody helped me. A lot of the folks that are in the Houston area moved there from the New Orleans area whenever Katrina hit there. And so now this is their second time through a disaster like this. Again, I ask the question, why does it take a disaster? Because the same love and spirit, think about that if it were shown on a daily basis to each other. Think about if we could show the love to our neighbor, the love to the people who live in the neighborhood that may not necessarily be your neighbor right next door to you, but they live in the area. Think if we could be and do the things that we do in a natural disaster, in a disastrous time, a hurricane or a typhoon or earthquake or whatever the disaster may be. Think in terms of if we could do that on a daily basis. I mentioned a little bit earlier about the service. For the most part, it was a church service, ecumenical service, you call it what you want to call it. But there was everyone there at Yankee Stadium when that occurred. Jewish, Christian, Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, and so forth and so on down the line. Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, Mormon, you name it, the folks were in that stadium. And they all recognized and realized there was something higher than just us. There is a higher power that's more than just those of us who are here on earth. And they all got together in Yankee Stadium that day and they prayed. And whatever their way was, whatever their deity or whoever it was they believed in, they all prayed. Think if we would do that just on a regular basis. If all the various faiths and religions would come together and agree to work together, to love each other, to support each other, rather than constantly tearing each other down, constantly looking upon differences as if it's a bad thing instead of celebrating the fact that it's different in what you bring to the table. Because see, right now, those folks in Houston, they're not worrying about who is poor, who is rich, who is black, who is white, who is Hispanic, who is old, who is young. They're not worrying about that right now. Because Harvey ultimately became the equalizer for folks in that area. Because the richest person in that area, if they need gasoline, can't get it. The richest person in that area, if they need something in the supermarket and the supermarket doesn't have it, they can't get it. The richest person in that area, if they had a mansion that was within that flood zone or within that levee, their house was flooded out just like the poorest person in that area. So that's why it really does not pay us to be sitting on a high horse thinking that we're all that in a bag of chips, thinking that we're that high and mighty, thinking that we're the creme de la creme because we have possessions or money, because it can be wiped out in seconds. Don't believe me? Ask the folks in New Orleans during Katrina. Ask the folks in New Jersey during Sandy. Ask the folks in the New York metropolitan area during 9/11. And now ask the folks down in Houston with Harvey. And anywhere we've had these storms, ask those folks if during those times, during those disasters, whether they cared or not with the help that came to them was white, or if the help that came to them was black, or if the help that came to them was Hispanic, or the help that came to them were gay, or the help that came to them was straight, or the help that came to them was heavyset, or the help that came to them was tall, or the help that came to them was short, or the help that came to them was whatever they may or may not have been. All they were concerned about was that they get assistance and they get some help. So why can't we live like that on a daily basis? Why on a regular basis we have to be trying to put each other down instead of building each other up? This same phenomenon kind of occurs during the holiday season in December. Whether it be Hanukkah, whether it be Christmas, Kwanzaa, whatever's going on during that time. For some reason in December, folks just seem to get nicer. And I ask that same question. Well, okay, if you can do it for the month of December, if you can do it in a disaster, why can't that be a way of life? That's the question I want you to think about as you're listening to this episode of The Mark Medley Show. And again, I thank you, whatever you're choosing to listen to this on, whatever platform that you're listening, because you can again get me on iHeartRadio, you can get me on Spreaker, you can get me on Apple, you can get me on Google, you can get me on TuneIn. You can also follow my blog, The Critical Thinker, if you log on to www.thereadingcircleblog.blogspot.com. You can get The Critical Thinker there. As a matter of fact, I have another podcast as well, which is called The Critical Thinker. And you can also catch me live on Saturday mornings as I web stream on gobrave.org. That's GOBRAVE.org. And it's heard in the northern New Jersey on FM radio on WP 88.7 FM. And that show is The Reading Circle with Mark Medley, where I interview authors from around the world. You also can follow me on Twitter at Reading Circle 01 and Think Critical 01. So I thank you. This has been another wonderful edition of the Mark Medley Show, but I do challenge you to think and to change the way of life, that if we can just be as nice and kind to each other and helpful and concerning with each other as we are in a disaster, we'll be together again